Hello, South Africa, and welcome back to Coronacast, your twice-weekly dedicated channel keeping you up to date with the latest news around the coronavirus and the response to that in South Africa. If you're tuning in for the first time, I'm John Steenhuisen, leader of the Democratic Alliance, and we host the show every Tuesday and Friday at the same time, 2 p.m. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and we've got another action-packed show, and I'll be introducing you to our guests a little bit later. Well, we heard the news this week that we're now moving to level 3. The president finally came on TV to share with us that news, and that's good news that we're starting to open up parts of the economy and to ensure that we can protect both lives and livelihoods. Something, as you know, if you've been watching the show, that we've been pushing for a very, very long time. And unfortunately, for many, many South Africans, the opening up is coming 6 weeks too late. A lot of the economists are warning now about an economic depression that's facing us on the horizon. And more worryingly, reports in a number of financial papers today around what they're terming permanent job losses as a result of the last couple of weeks of hard lockdown. It's also worth noting that by the time the 1st of June rolls around, we would have had the longest hard lockdown in the world, longer even than both Italy and Wuhan province. And this has come at a huge cost for South Africa, and a cost that we still need to get a full reckoning on. And I'm sure that in the coming days and weeks, we will start to be able to quantify at just what cost it has come to South Africa. It's also become very, very clear that we've lost a lot of time during this particular lockdown, where we haven't necessarily done the things that we should have done, and at not nearly the pace that we should have done that. And again, big concerns remain around the testing, tracing and tracking ability, but most importantly, the turnaround time for that testing. As we move into a hotspot model system, it's going to be very, very difficult to manage a system of that magnitude and that surgically precision management without ensuring that we have a turnaround time on testing. It's no use isolating someone if they've been, for instance, allowed to wander around for 4 days after having waited for their test results to come back and infected other South Africans. So a lot of unanswered questions. And so in studio with me today, I've got Natasha Mazzone, who's the Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance in Parliament. And we're going to be talking a little bit about openness, transparency, accountability. Parliament this week is going to have its first question session, and we'll be talking a little bit about the mechanics about how that's going to work and what this means for openness, transparency and accountability. And then I've got with me Gwen Ngwenya, the head of the DA's policy unit, who has been at the forefront of assisting the party to develop its policy proposals and its various recommendations during the course of this coronavirus, and who also put a lot of work into the submission which we made to President Ramaphosa last Friday on what level 3 regulation should look like. And we're going to be obviously going through that and taking some of the questions that need to be asked, and obviously the questions that you are sending through. So please don't forget, you can send your questions through to us at any time during the week, and we'll do our best to make sure that we're getting people on that you want to listen to and the types of areas that you want to see a focus on. Well, this is an interactive program, and we want to bring you the most up-to-date information that we can, and the information and the answers that you out there at home are looking for. So without any further ado, I'm going to proceed now to Natasha. Natasha, welcome back to Coronacast. It's great to have you in studio again.
Thanks, John. It's good to be here, and it's good to be in an economy that's opening up and in a less sort of bizarre environment. It's starting to feel a bit normal again.
Yeah. Talking about normal again, Wednesday is the first parliamentary question session that's going to take place. Do you want to take us through a little bit of the background, how it's going to work,
Sure.
what the various plans that will be put in place are going to entail?
Well, I think the coronavirus has taught us that we have to accept there's a new normal, and it'll never be business as it was in the past. So certainly for the foreseeable future, we're going to be using virtual platforms in businesses, in parliaments, all across the board. And we know that these virtual platforms work, and we've seen them working across the world. So exciting that South Africa is now reaching that particular point. We'll be having what we call a hybrid system on Wednesday. There will be an amount of people in the House, and that has been determined by the way we can social distance in the House and the sanitizing in the House. And other of our colleagues who are in other provinces or who might be compromised, be immunocompromised, will be joining us from the Zoom platform. So we'll have some questions being asked in the physical form in Parliament and the other questions being asked via the Zoom platform. We were a bit worried about the security after we were porno-bombed very unfortunately in one of our meetings. So we've made sure that the platform is completely secure. And I think it's going to be a wonderful experience as MPs to see how we can work hand in hand with technology.
Yeah. So what is the question session going to be? Is it a cluster question session? Which ministers are going to be? Are ministers going to be present, or how's it going to work?
So we're clustering two clusters together because we're in an emergency situation. So ministers have to answer questions on an urgent basis. So we are going to, for example, there'll be questions to the Minister of Health, there'll be questions to the Minister of Social Development. I very much doubt that any of the ministers are going to be in the House because most of them are in their ministries up in Pretoria, and they're doing executive work up there, so I think they'll be beaming in. But we've got our full range of questions that are going in, and the Democratic Alliance is going to have their full quota of 20 members in the House. And we do have some members that are in Gauteng that will be asking questions, and they'll be zooming in with us. So it's going to be a great, interesting, different way of being normal.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's going to make a big difference in terms of disruptions in the House. It's very difficult to disrupt a sitting if the presiding officer can just press mute. So I think the presiding officers are going to really enjoy getting into this new system.
Absolutely. I think the host feature on Zoom is going to become every presiding officer's favourite thing. Yeah. But it's also up to the chief whips very much. And John, if you don't mind me sharing, John, you asked me if you could be in the House, and at a certain point I said to you, you couldn't, because I didn't know how many members could be in the House. And that's how seriously we're taking our social distancing and making sure we're all safe in the House. And we do know now that you can be in the House with us because we have enough people to allow it. But certainly the chief whips are going to have to take a huge responsibility in making sure that it's very organised, because the presiding officers are going to be working on the digital as well as physical platform. So they must know who to expect questions from. And the chief whips are very much going to be the directors and the conductors of the orchestra tomorrow, making sure that it runs smoothly. And we're very lucky that we've got Jordan Hill-Lewis, who's our whip in charge of questions. So Jordan and I will be conducting the DA side of the orchestra. And I'm very excited, and I think it's going to show South Africans just how well the digital platform works. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, certainly there's been a lot of this innovation already. I've watched two of the Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons, and I watched a session of the Brazilian Parliament. They actually had a full plenary done via the Zoom. So it clearly is the way that parliaments are moving, and certainly for the foreseeable future, this could well become the new normal.
It's definitely going to become the new normal. And, not just because of COVID, but simple things like transport costs, accommodation costs. These are things that in the post-COVID world, we must understand that not only us, but the world is going to be economically depressed. And we certainly aren't going to be able to do the international travelling for business that we've been used to. So I think a lot more conferencing, a lot more webinars, a lot more on the virtual platform. And then we truly do become this global village, because we can literally sit in our own homes and beam straight to China or India or Siberia.
But also, I mean, it's something that Parliament should have been moving to a long time ago, and we've discussed this when I was a chief whip in Parliament. We had discussed this then about using virtual platforms. Every Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, we've got these hordes of officials that fly down from government head offices into Pretoria. They come down, we have to book accommodation for them, they've got to get booked into with vehicles, aeroplane tickets, etc. This is actually a way that could actually, in a post-COVID world, save South African taxpayers a lot of money. There's no need now for a committee in Parliament to have officials being flown down. We could have them all there by Zoom without having to leave their offices, bringing greater efficiency and surely a massive cost saving for the South African taxpayer.
Huge cost saving, and a lot more effective in terms of the work that officials can do, because when you're in an airport, you're an hour before the flight, then you're 2 hours on the flight, an hour to get to the destination. That's half your day gone. So we're losing a lot of man hours. So what this is going to entail is a higher efficiency from officials that need to come to Parliament, and certainly a massive saving in terms of who needs to be accommodated and flights and things like that. So definitely for Parliament, this is a great advantage.
Yeah. And we were very lucky as well. We've had now 2 virtual town halls with people I did one in a town hall in Mossel Bay the other day without having to leave my own home, and being able to speak to voters and citizens, many of whom would never have got in their car in an evening to go to a political meeting to engage with a public representative. So I actually think that there's a lot of opportunities here for the public to hold their public representatives accountable in a far more meaningful way. Even an MP sitting in Parliament Tuesday to Thursday could notionally be having meetings in his home or her home constituency using the Zoom platform. It's all be like they've never left.
Absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head. This digital platform makes us so accountable, both to people within our own party and to people who vote for us or who are thinking of voting for us. And in a country such as ours, people aren't inclined to go out to these town hall meetings, especially at night because it's not safe, especially in winter because it's cold. Now you have, we've got huge numbers of people joining in on these town hall meetings because it's so easy to do. You have possibilities of translation services, you have possibilities of viewing services. And what it does is it means that people who would normally not be able to have transport, for example, to get to you, can now have access to you on their smartphone. And, I saw a study that at the end of February, 27th of February, there were over 22 million smartphones in South Africa. And, that means that more than half our population has a smartphone. And then, you're looking at other computers, and you're looking at iPads and all sorts of things. So it means that we are so much more accessible to so many more people. And it's definitely the direction we need to be moving in. We must never be scared of technology.
Yeah.
And technology, Jane Sitole, she's our leader in Mpumalanga. Jane did a beautiful example of how a school that was a mud school under a tree was having a class zoomed in from a professor in Harvard.
Wow.
And, that just goes to show exactly what we can do with technology as long as we're not afraid of it.
And I think I was on a webinar this last week with Alec Hogg on his BizNews platform. I was with David Shapiro, a number of other economists, and there was a hall of almost 1,000 people that were on the webinar. So there's also the opportunities for us to share knowledge with people and to share ideas, I think is so great. And I mean, that's even why it is even more important that parties like the DA really start to focus more on the war of ideas and the policy space, because the ability to now impart those ideas and policies with more South Africans is richer and riper than ever before.
Absolutely. And it holds us accountable. And it makes us accessible. Because at the moment, your average voter, your average citizen will get to see an MP maybe once a week when you're in the constituency, or if they happen to be around the parliamentary precinct. But on this digital platform, it forces us to be a lot more accountable and a lot more accessible. And I think that South Africans are going to benefit greatly from that, because I think for far too long, public representatives have had a barrier to hide behind. And I certainly don't want to hide behind a barrier. I want to be held accountable. I like for people to hold me to account. Keeps me on my toes, and I think it keeps us doing excellent work.
Yeah. I was watching an incredible platform this week. I was exposed to it as well. It's also how you use technology to interact. It's a great thing called GovChat. And it's available on the web. People can have a look at it. But it's a way for citizens to interact with government services. And using a digital platform as simple as WhatsApp, being able to log queries with the local city, being able to find out the details of who your local representative is. And so I think the more that we're able to foster these digital platforms and innovations like GovChat, I think the better it's going to be for citizens to be more empowered, to be able to not only have the information, but also to be able to share problems that they're having and to seek services from government departments and to rate them there afterwards, which are huge analytical tools that we're available to help us refocus budgets, to be able to I was really, really impressed with this GovChat platform, and I really hope it's something that's going to be rolled out across government.
Absolutely. The innovation behind it is so exciting. And, I love technology, and I love, these tech ideas that are coming out. And there's so much we can do with it, and there's so many ways we can enrich South Africans. And as you see coverage expanding into the most rural of areas now, we are able to have a video call with someone in the deepest rural KZN who we've never been able to chat to before, who couldn't get to us. It was difficult for us to get to them. And now they're able to speak to us and ask us questions and really interact with us. And I think that is so terribly important in our country.
I mean, for me, the big thing is it's, how you turn our citizens from passive recipients of services into active citizens that are able to be agents of change within their communities. And there's just so much potential now to give them the tools to be able to be those agents of change, and rather than just sitting back passively waiting for government services, are able to proactively get out there and be citizens that are on full alert and are pushing forward for South Africa. So you think things are going to go smoothly at the question session? Are you expecting any hiccups?
There might be a hiccup, but the thing is, we have to be ready for the hiccup. So our team is ready for any eventuality that could happen. We've made ourselves available. We have to be open to these ideas, that there could be a problem, and we need to roll with it as we go along. We're professionals. We know our business, and certainly, we know technology. So as I said, there's nothing to be afraid of with technology. We've got everything to gain with embracing technology, and certainly these new platforms that we're on. And if there's a hiccup here or there, we'll roll with it and we'll make it work eventually.
Sure. Yeah. Well, talking on the subject of knowledge and sharing knowledge and knowledge empowering our citizens to be able to make choices in their lives, I think that a great victory today for Dr. Glenda Gray. The Medical Research Council have cleared her of charges. You may remember she was the doctor who spoke out and was very heavily criticized by government for doing so. And was bullied and victimized by the Director General of the Health Department, Anban Pillay, and there was almost a witch hunt that was set upon her for daring to speak out. But surely in a crisis like this, what we really should be looking for is a plurality of voices. And just because someone doesn't necessarily agree with government doesn't make them guilty of heresy. I think that I really get worried in a democracy where you've got these variety of voices, and it's all right to have different opinions, but the last thing we can afford is for people to be too scared to be able to put their opinions on the table for fear of the sort of treatment that's been meted out to Dr. Glenda Gray. So kudos to all those academics that came to her and rallied to her defense, but big thumbs down for those toadying autocrats who have systematically tried to victimize and demonize her over the course of the last few days.
And I think the humble pie that they have to swallow is going to get stuck halfway down. It's really going to be a hard thing for them to swallow, and good, because to talk truth to power is difficult. And we need more brave people in this country, and we need people to stand up and to call government out when it's not doing their job. And we need, at the moment, we're in such crisis, John. Today we sit on, it's the 26th of May, and TERS is still not open for people to put in UIF claims.
Really?
So, yes, the portal is not open yet. It asks you to please continue trying. We have people who don't have UIF payments dating back from April. So, John, I'm not a business person, I'm a politician. But I'm surrounded by business people, and I can see what this is doing to our business community, not only to the owners of the business, but the employees of the business. We must never forget that UIF money does not belong to the government. It belongs to the people who pay the UIF every month in good faith that when they need that money, it will come to them. And this is the perfect example of reminding the people that they actually have the power. The people have the power, not the government. And tomorrow, the DA is launching a very interactive UIF campaign. where we will be doing a series of interviews and we'll be doing a series of press releases, really forcing the government's hand in this. It's absolutely unacceptable that in the midst of this crisis, we still have to worry about UIF payments coming out. Michael Bagram from the DA and Michael Carter have been doing an excellent job in their committee. Short of drawing a picture for the department, they've done everything they possibly can to get the ball rolling. And quite frankly, the behaviour of the department is unacceptable. The worry that this is put on the shoulders of millions of South Africans is just, it's ridiculous. And I'm looking forward to this campaign really empowering South Africans and taking some of the courage of the Dr. Greys of this world to learn that if you speak truth to power, as long as you're speaking truth, they can never hold it against you.
Yeah. So talking about speaking truth to power, I've got some questions here from some of our Coronacast viewers asking about the tobacco ban, etc., and saying, what are you doing about it? Are you going to court? But surely the biggest responsibility for tackling the tobacco ban lies with the tobacco companies themselves. British American Tobacco, Philip Morris are huge multi-billion-dollar corporations. And I really do get quite frustrated sometimes when we're saying, well, why aren't you taking the government to court when you've got these huge, gigantic corporations who have built up loyal customers over the course of many, many years, who are essentially sitting back now and expecting other people to fight these battles. Surely they should go to battle for their customers. And, we're busy looking at how we can get involved in the case. But, we've chosen cases where there's no big corporates to stand up for citizens. So things like the military curfew, things like the arbitrary ban on exercise. But just as the e-commerce retailers stood up and were countered in battling the absurd e-commerce regulations, and some of those were brave enough to come on our show and express themselves, I really think that there's something missing in this equation, and that is, where are the big tobacco companies? This ban is arbitrary. It's killing government revenue, and it's creating a huge black market for illegal cigarettes. Plus, you can't argue with me that it is helping people's health. No. If Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma thinks people have stopped smoking, then, I don't know what planet she's living on, but what people are now smoking are substandard cigarettes, far higher tar content, far more dangerous to people's health, and people are paying a huge amount of money. I've told now the price for a box of cigarettes is around about 200 to 250 Rand. A box of cigarettes that would usually cost in the region of 22 Rand 50. The underworld are making a huge amount of money here, and this makes no sense.
Never mind the fact that it makes no sense, and never mind the fact that we should be angry with big business for not standing up to government. Can you just imagine how much money government is losing in sin tax?
Yeah.
Never before have we needed that sin tax more than we need it now. But the government is willing to lose billions of rand in revenue because of this arbitrary decision. It cannot be explained. There is no scientific evidence anywhere in the world that suggests that smokers would be more at risk. In fact, some people the conspiracy theorists of the world would argue the opposite. This kind of ban nowhere else in the world except here in South Africa. So, of course, South Africans are now asking why. Who's benefiting from this? There must be something more to the story. Yes, South Africa, there is something more to the story. You are not imagining it. It is bizarre. You should be outraged, and you should be putting big pressure on these big corporations to go and fight these battles. Because as a political party, we fight the political battles, and that's what we're in court about, is the political issues. But, for a company like British American Tobacco to be sitting back at the moment, and they did threaten to go to court, now follow through on your threat. Do not be afraid of government. If we the people aren't afraid of the government, you as business shouldn't be afraid of the government.
I think that, their big problem is always, we're terrified to go take government on because government is our regulator. But I really do believe that if you are able to be assertive on behalf of your company, you back your company and your right to sell your product, particularly in the face of what is a completely arbitrary ban. Even the most health-conscious countries in the world never banned tobacco under their hardest of lockdowns. So this nonsense that it's linked to COVID health and that is a complete subterfuge to hide what's really going on here. And I agree with you, there's something really fishy going on around this tobacco ban and why it's in place. But really it's time, I think, for them to put their money where their mouth is and to
put the money where your mouth is
and to get out there and do it. But particularly because I say it's arbitrary and irrational.
It's completely
irrational. Doesn't make
irrational.
sense at all.
I mean, we're the only country in the world where there's no smoke without cigarettes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Madness.
So, I mean, that also, brings me to, to the other points around the whole issues around our court cases. So I know there's a lot of people saying, well, does this mean you've stopped your court cases? And the answer is no. And why are we not stopping our court cases?
John, we're not stopping our court cases because we are fundamentally fighting for our constitutional rights, and we're looking at the constitutionality of many of the regulations. Now, we've already been told, in my opinion, a lot like a child would be told at school, which I didn't appreciate, that if we don't behave ourselves and the government think that we're not doing everything according to the gospel of the cabinet, they are hanging over our heads level 4 and level 5 again. So we don't have a curfew at the moment, for example. But what happens if you live in a hotspot? Till the 1st of June, quite right. But what happens if you live in a hotspot that the government decides must go back into level 4 or 5? Then you will have a curfew. And that means we still have an obligation to fight for your right, because there is no rational reason for you to have a curfew. It's a military imposition on your freedom of your freedom of movement and just your general rights that should never be allowed. So our court action isn't as simple as just saying move us to a different level. Our court actions are looking at the constitutionality and the effect that these regulations have on our rights, not only in level 3, in all the levels, but most especially given the fact that this is being held over our heads that we could be moved to level 4 or 5 if we don't behave ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good time to bring in our colleague Gwen Ngwenya, talking about all things level 3 and lockdowns. So, Gwen, welcome back to Coronacast, and thank you for making time to be with us, joining us in studio from Joburg. Well, let's start off. What is your view on the tobacco ban? You studied economics and the like. You must have come across literature and some stats, etc., around cigarettes. Do you think it makes sense?
I mean, I completely share the view that's been articulated that, we are at a situation where we need to put money into people's hands and we need to put it through the economy. And to do that and to impose a ban that we have at the moment that robs us of so much potential revenue and critically robs us of that revenue without just cause is obviously insane. So for me, the driving factor is that the government has not been able to establish that there is a credible link between smoking and COVID transmission risk. I mean, obviously the picture might change dramatically if that was what was being presented. But at its core, so many of our objections are grounded simply on that, the lack of credible or rational link between the proposed policy and the restriction.
Good. Well, Gwen, let's talk about level 3 now. And you played a very big role in terms of getting to grips with what level 3 and spearheading the DA submission there. Do you want to take us through what level 3 is going to look like?
I think what has to be noted, there's actually a dramatic difference between the level 3 as announced this past Saturday to how level 3 was initially envisioned. There were still a number of restrictions across other sectors in level 3, but as it stands on the economic front, it appears that all economic sectors are open, with the exception of personal health, personal care industry like hairdressers and nail salons, and then also restaurants and gyms, those kind of leisure entertainment facilities. So, but everything else is open. And then also, obviously, the curfew is being lifted in level 3, although social gatherings with family and friends are also still prohibited. So the only reason that people can leave their homes under level 3 is to go to work or to obtain the goods and services that are permitted under level 3. So it's especially on the economic front, if you were to put side to side the schedules that were released late April of what level 3 was going to look like, there has been a change. And therein lies, I think, some of the why we should also be concerned is that we've had almost levels within levels. So level 4 had various revisions. We know that the country, I would say, won the battle for e-commerce, where it was eventually introduced, but it initially wasn't. And there are some revisions that were made to level 4. And similarly, it seems now there are revisions that were made to level 3. So it's increasingly becoming a mockery, this idea of having distinct or discrete levels, when you almost now have level 4 and also then 4.1, 4.2, and level 3 will have its own 3.1, 3.2. And really, so there's, these levels are starting to really lack credibility about what's driving them.
Yeah. And so let's talk about this, because people are saying, oh, but, the DA called for a phased lockdown approach. And, why are you saying something? Well, they appear to think that we're saying something different. Do you want to just take us through what has changed since we originally tabled that phased lockdown approach?
Yeah. Well, up front, it's also important to say that, look, I certainly am not a medical expert, but what people rely on policymakers, and including those situated within political parties, to do is to read up as much as possible on what the experts in that particular area are saying, to aggregate that information, and then to come to a position, and then to be able to clearly explain how the position that we currently hold is linked to the relevant empirical evidence. And so as we stand, it has come to our attention, so various experts have gone even on the public record to say that the current approach to the lockdowns has not been scientific, meaning that, if you have discrete levels, as even we initially proposed, because at the time we were still pushing for as much mass testing and with 24-hour turnaround times to happen as possible. If we were conducting that level of mass randomized testing with under 24-hour turnaround times, that would generate for us the credible data needed to move between discrete levels of lockdown. But without that happening, it means you are, in a sense, flying blind. You don't have, without the testing and with such long turnaround times, our testing turnaround times are still being measured in matters of days, not matters of hours. So that combined reality means that you don't have the credible information to make a call about whether you should be at level 3, level 2, level 4. The situation gets very, very murky. And then you compound onto that the lack of transparency about how the different sectors the risk has been assessed. How is it that e-commerce was initially not allowed in level 4? It calls into doubt the risk assessment for those sectors that was conducted. Mm-hmm. So based on that reality, so I hope, we can explain that the reality has shifted. Based on that reality, it's not so much a case of us flip-flopping or abandoning the smart lockdown. We cannot implement a smart lockdown. So you could then engage in some kind of charade where you continue to say you are in favor of a smart lockdown and we must implement a smart lockdown. So we could continue with that kind of political charade. But the reality on the ground would be that we lack the credible information to make that strategy work. Yeah. And so that's why we have pivoted to saying that actually there should just be an opening up, but not a reckless one, an opening up that is combined with non-pharmaceutical interventions like wearing masks, hygiene, and implementing sector health protocols. So it's not throwing caution to the wind at all. We are still concerned about the health risks. Just how we manage them has to change with the reality.
Yeah. So let's ask the controversial question. Has lockdown worked?
So the reason that's controversial is that it depends how you assess that. So we have been told that the lockdown period, especially initially, was successful at delaying the peak, which of course we needed to do to increase testing, to ramp up health readiness. And that was the second component to a lockdown, right? You weren't only trying to flatten the curve, you were actually trying to raise the line. So to improve health sector readiness and testing. So those components are also important in how we assess whether the lockdown has been a success or not. And for the most part, it seems like even under the optimistic projections for what COVID deaths will look like and what the projection under the optimistic projections, it still looks like we will not have enough capacity to meet demand. All we could have done really was to try and significantly increase capacity, but I don't think we've done enough to be above that demand curve.
Mm. So what do we need to do? What is underpinning our strategy that we've proposed to government?
So what we've proposed now is saying that, look, if we cannot provide the credible data or triggers to trigger each level of lockdown, we then do need to balance lives and livelihoods, as we've been saying right from the beginning, that we risk as many lives, potentially more, from the COVID-related economic risks, as well as the non-COVID health risks that are exacerbated by a stringent or a hard lockdown. So if we balance all of that reality together, it means that we do have to move towards a situation where it's a lot simpler. So an opening up of the economy, combined with what many experts have been saying, what they're calling non-pharmaceutical intervention. So we have to wear masks, we have to maintain social distancing. So social distancing doesn't go away because there's no lockdown. You're still trying to limit your contact with other people and to make sure that you are, keeping your distance. Washing hands, and also very importantly, which I think we do keep on stressing, but it's not a message that I feel has really filtered into the mainstream debate or discussion around lifting the lockdown, is the need for sector-specific health protocols. So yes, we have welcomed the level 3 and the greater opening up of the economy, but are various sectors ready? And we were told that actually government was going to work with sectors and industries, and we would see sector-based health protocols. That's so important because you can imagine that keeping conditions safe in a mine or in a construction company might differ from what is required in a restaurant or in a shopping center. So we need those, and definitely in a school. So we need those health protocols that are attuned to the specific sectoral realities to be put in place. And if I can just say that if we do that, if we implement sector protocols, I think in its own way, it ensures that the opening is phased, because you can imagine that if, for example, the health protocol for restaurants opening is that customers have to be seated 1.5 meters apart, it naturally means that firstly, restaurants have to prepare themselves for that. Not every restaurant is going to have the square footage to open if that is the case. So I think in some ways, the sectoral health protocols are their own inhibitor to kind of a reckless economic opening, because it means that only those businesses able to meet them will meet them, and also businesses will meet them at varying stages. Some businesses may be able to open up immediately and meet the health protocols. Some might need to work towards meeting the health protocols before they're open. So I do very much believe that having these sectoral health protocols will still guarantee a gradual and responsible opening of the economy.
Yeah. Talking about sector specific, a lot of questions coming through from our viewers, from Benny to Dominique, asking about hairdressing and personal care industry, which certainly looks like, if we could understand what's coming out of government, looks like it's still going to be barred. What was our suggestion around personal care, and how do you think that the industry could safely be opened in level 3?
No, well, again, this is the kind of area where you must always assume humility, and I'm not, someone in that industry, but what we had suggested for all industries is that the Ministry of Health should work with industry bodies to develop sector-specific health protocols. What we had suggested were, to kind of give you an idea of what those would look like. And so they would include things like only, making sure that each customer is 1.5 meters apart, making sure that every single customer is wearing a mask, making sure that each customer is sanitized upon entry and exit of the salon. So, and sterilizing all equipment from hairbrushes to anything that is used after each customer. But of course, there could be more that we're just not thinking of because, well, we're not in that industry. But if you work with the industry and you say, these are our concerns, these are the risks that we have highlighted for your industry, you would be surprised how innovative people and how well people know their own industry, that they'll be able to say, oh, if that's your concern, this is how we can actually respond to it. So inform business leaders and businesses what government's concerns are with each industry. They can say, these are the risks that we foresee in personal care. Then the personal care industry can respond and say, well, here's how we are prepared to deal and address with the risks that you have highlighted.
Well, I know that our Shadow Cabinet's been working very hard, and Manny de Freitas has been working very, very hard on a tourism plan, and we hope to get Manny on next week to come and talk about that. But that's exactly it. You know, the sector is coming together and saying, this is how we can manage it going forward. Gwen, this is the one that, a lot of journalists ask, a lot of people say, a lot of the questions that come through. Why does the DA-run Western Cape have the highest infection numbers and COVID deaths in South Africa? Do you want to just take us through that? And also, perhaps if you could, for some in the media, explain the difference between the number of tests done and the number of tests done as a percentage of your population, because there's I think a little bit of fancy footwork going on.
Right. So, I mean, the reality is there are a number of plausible reasons for why the infections are higher and possibly even why the deaths were higher. So those reasons include, for example, that there already, even before we had the lockdown, there were already more people infected in the Western Cape than other regions of the country due to the high levels of tourism from high-risk countries. So before the lockdown, the Western Cape was receiving tourists from high-risk countries at a greater rate than other areas in the country. So they could have just from the beginning have had more cases to start with. Other reasons then do include the fact that the Western Cape has been conducting far more testing. And what you point to is that there have been some who, and I mean, I think it's absolutely okay to question, but this is where the critical distinction comes in. Some will say, well, surely Gauteng is doing more testing. These are the absolute number of tests Gauteng is conducting compared with the absolute number of tests the Western Cape is conducting. But that misses the crucial point that the two have very different populations. The population size of Gauteng, I believe, is around 15 million, and the Western Cape is closer to around 6 million. Obviously, that's not completely accurate. You will have to look up what those numbers are precisely, but they are in that ballpark for each of those two provinces. So what matters really is to look at the proportion of testing as per the population. So the Western Cape is conducting more tests proportionate to its population size. And an easy way that is usually communicated is to, instead of communicating absolute testing numbers, is to communicate how many tests have been conducted per 1,000 or per 100,000 or per million, as some do. But the point is, at least you are then comparing apples with apples. Yeah.
Well, I think that's an important distinction to make, because I think that, there's this unfortunate tendency that seems to be creeping in to try and paint the Western Cape in this negative light, when in fact, Alan Winde and our team in the Western Cape have been doing everything right in terms of being able to combat and focus on fighting the virus. And in that light, earlier today in the Portfolio Committee in Parliament, Dr. William Kiese indicated that some hotspot areas would remain at level 4. Why do you think that keeping metros locked in level 4 would be a bad idea?
If I may quickly, before I address those, just to say that I don't want to give people an incomplete picture, but some of the other reasons for the Western Cape is also, I think it is important to speak about post-mortem testing. So you can imagine that if not much testing is happening whilst people are still alive, their deaths are very rarely recorded as COVID deaths because they were not tested. So it's important to test people so that obviously their deaths are then recorded correctly. And if they're not at the point of death, to then have post-mortem testing, which the Western Cape is also conducting, and I believe is also a significant driver of their numbers, is the cases that are picking up through post-mortem testing. But that it's also important, and I know that most people don't like this, but to just include the element of the unknown, just to say that we all need to be a bit humble here and say there is or diverse plausible reasons why the infection numbers could be higher. But there's also one other reason that we just, medical experts don't know yet. And there's a lot that's going to be discovered and learned about the virus after all of this is said and done, as more research is conducted retroactively. Yeah. But on the question of level 4 and hotspots, I think, our objection from the beginning was using a kind of blunt instrument, and that as we progress, we need to now start to take a precision tool to how we target interventions, especially if we hope to open up the economy as increasingly is happening. And so we think that it's wrong to put an entire province, for example, under lockdown, and that we need to start identifying particular hotspots. And I think that is now where we're going to start moving towards on the 1st of the next month, is to have localized assessments or alert levels. But still, some would argue that the level of an entire city or metro is still far too broad, and that you need to actually focus on hotspots at a ward and district level. And even then, I think we will see in the coming the discussion is going to be about what does focusing on hotspots mean. Some argue that a focus on hotspots should just mean that you are targeting testing and other types of interventions in that hotspot, but that it's still at the same level of restriction as the rest of the metro or region that it's situated in. And you can understand why that's the case, because it would be very difficult. I mean, I live in Johannesburg, for example, to close off one district that's in a metro, because people can easily move out of, if I'm living in a suburb or district where we're in level 4, it's very easy to just go to one that isn't, to purchase alcohol or to conduct whatever activity you want to conduct. So I think we will start having those conversations about the difficulty of if you were to have localized different levels of lockdown because people move.
But again, none of this will work in a month of Sundays if you're not getting the testing, tracking, and that test result turnaround time spot on. It'll undermine everything if that's not done.
Yes, and if citizens aren't also taking responsibility and following those non-pharmaceutical interventions. I mean, I listened to an excellent interview last week between Judge Dennis Davis with Professor Shibimadi, and essentially he was really emphasizing this point that, what our strongest weapon right now at our disposal is social distancing, wearing of masks, and hand and kind of surface sanitization. If we don't do those things, an economic lockdown is not going to help or save us. We absolutely have to focus on those areas. And almost no expense should be spared in trying to make sure that we get those non-pharmaceutical interventions right. The government could literally buy 5 masks for every single citizen, and that would still be cheaper than how much the economic cost will be if we continue to be under lockdown. So no expense should be spared in ensuring that we actually are able to be successful on the non-pharmaceutical interventions.
So we've got some questions that have come in from viewers, Gwen and Tash. Sakisol Maletla asks, is residential construction allowed in level 3? My understanding is residential construction is allowed in level 3, but a lot of questions around domestic workers. Can domestic workers return to work, and when can this be done?
So, I mean, for a while now, it's been the case that domestic workers, if they're looking after the elderly or sick or children, could be, could return to work. And it seems that, remember, we're still waiting for, as each level gets announced, various ministers and others and regulations actually then become finalized. So, but as I understand, as we are at the moment, of what level 3 will mean is that, yes, domestic workers can return to work, even if it's not for the elderly or children or sick, so just not their normal work professional duties, except that employers would have to provide them with private transport. So if you're a domestic worker or I suppose nanny or someone who helps with your gardening, they will have to take public transport to come to you, then that is still not allowed. They're only allowed if you're going to be providing them with private transport to your residence.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Gwen, for making the time. I don't know if you've got any closing comments or any last points you'd like to make before we close off.
I guess the main one is just say that, we have to be so ever sensitive to the changing environment, and that, I think sometimes people want more certainty than is just realistically anyone can provide. And I know that we might be sitting in a situation in 2 weeks' time where somebody says, but 2 weeks ago you said this and now you're saying something different. And the reality may be, yes, we are now saying something different, but let me tell you what has changed in the last 2 weeks. And I think that's really the approach that we're going to have to keep on taking, is the DA and I'm sure experts will constantly be revising their positions as long as they can explain what has changed in the intervening period. Yeah.
And I think as policy makers, as decision makers, we must not be rigid. We've got to understand and move with the science. And I'm reminded here about the rigidity in the early 90s around the government response on HIV/AIDS and the link between that and antiretrovirals. And there was just a dogged refusal to move with the science, despite the fact that science was showing without a shadow of doubt there was a link between HIV and AIDS, and that antiretrovirals were one of the best ways to prevent mother-to-child transmissions. Many of the people that were in government then stuck rigidly to their positions, and as a result of failure to move with the science, many South Africans died as a result. So we mustn't be afraid as policymakers, I don't believe, when the science and the experts start to point to something different, and the experience of other countries that are moving through this ahead of us. We mustn't be afraid to change our positions, and I think rigidity will be the real problem in a situation like this. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Gwen, and thank you, Tash. And so we'll all be watching very carefully on Wednesday. I'll be there, and we'll obviously be able to report back around how that went. So thank you very much for being in the studio, and strength to you. Your first whipping session as the Chief Whip of the Opposition in a virtual parliament.
Absolutely.
So one for the memoirs, I think.
Absolutely. Writing history as we go along.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for being here. Well, everybody, that's about all we've got time for this week, and I hope you found it interesting. Remember as well that if you've missed out on some of the information, you're looking for to catch up on some of the stuff that was spoken about, you can visit our dedicated website, www.da.org.za/defeating coronavirus, and that will be able to give you up. We've also uploaded Gwen Ngwenya from our policy unit's excellent document on frequently asked questions, which sets out very clearly what our position is and what our view for the future is, certainly as we currently sit here today. And so we also need to express our concern about the authoritarianism of some of the ministers. And I think anybody who saw Bheki Cele this week is now insisting that not only are you not allowed to have cigarettes or buy cigarettes, you've got to now have till slips proving that you bought those cigarettes prior to the lockdown. It's precisely this type of petty, cavalier attitude from those in power that actually makes citizens annoyed and leads to widespread non-adherence. And so what we really need is government to be acting in our best interests, but not to be petty and partisan in the way that we're seeing people like Bheki Cele behave over this. It's really annoying citizens. And you understand, we are citizens in a democratic republic of South Africa, underpinned by a constitution and a Bill of Rights. We are not subjects to some authoritarian regime that can tell us what to do, when to do it, what to drink, and what we can put in our own bodies. We are citizens. We are empowered to be able to make these decisions ourselves, and we must be allowed the space to do so. But we must also act responsibly as citizens. So, as Gwen has spoken about, PPE, the use of masks, washing our hands, social distancing, are all things that are our responsibility. And we need to make sure that at all times we're playing our part in defeating the coronavirus, certainly for the time that it's going to be with us for the next 18 to 24 months. My shout out this week goes to Dr. Glenda Gray for having the courage of her convictions to stand up and speak out and unafraid to share an opinion. And I think our democracy and our country is richer for that type of engagement. So well done to Dr. Gray, and I'm very glad that the persecution campaign against Dr. Gray has backfired so spectacularly on Mr. Pillay and his fellow travellers in the Medical Research Council, who tried to use these levers to bully a person from being able to share an opinion, when this time we should be listening to all the voices in the room. That's all we've got time for this week. Until later this week, we look forward to seeing you again on Coronacast. Don't forget to tune in again. And until then, stay safe, South Africa.